Welcome to Sartor TV. I'm Vaishali Jain. We're excited to have Robert Burnside join us today. Robert is partner and chief learning officer at public relations firm Ketchum. He's considered an expert in the fields of learning and development and also serves as an advisor and consultant for large organizations and nonprofits. And he's here to tell us more about the changing landscape of digital learning in the workplace. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here. Very good.
So tell us where the future of digital learning is headed.
Okay, well, I was recently at a CLO conference. A number of senior CLOs, we were discussing that. And the first answer is everybody's still figuring that out. You know, we thought we knew it for a while there, that it was going to be these online libraries and people would just go find what they needed. But that has very low engagement. So the short answer to your question is nobody really knows, and we're just finding our way.
What are some of the approaches that CLOs are at least starting to look at?
So the first thing people do with these large libraries of online content, in order to help their people, engage with that content, they're curating the content. So they're grouping it, like, okay, take these 3 courses first, these 3 courses second, and then you'll know what we want you to know for your skill. Again, the problem with that is still when you are taking those courses, often it's one person at a time in front of a computer, and sometimes the videos, especially if they're very long, can be boring.
Where does blended learning fit into all this?
It's a great question. A lot of what people are trying to do is to say, okay, face-to-face is, not scalable and too expensive, but we still ought to keep it there. And maybe we can do some face-to-face online, like with WebEx and that kind of thing. And then we'll ask them in between our face-to-face sessions, please take this library of content, prepare yourself, and bring it into the classroom. And that does help over time get the learning, you might say, brought together, right? But that immediately stops the great promise of digital learning, which is scalability. That already, if it's got to have some face-to-face time, one way or another, classroom or online, it's already much more complex. It's difficult to scale.
It is, yeah.
There are some insights into where I think it's going to go, okay? Digital learning. What we're finding is that you need that content to actually be already comprehensive. Don't expect the learner to find it. Don't expect the learner to glue together your learning path, Bring to the learner all of the comprehensive set of content they need to learn. That's one. And also that way you can make it relevant to the organization, make it purposeful. Secondly, that better be in the style and method that millennials are used to. That means like this. Give me a 2-minute learning, have me do something, okay. Give me a short video here, never longer than, even a minute and a half, stretching it. And then give me an animation here, and give me a short case study. And then help me discuss that with my buds, my buddies. Now, that style of content, comprehensively done in a group where you're talking about it with others, that's where I think it's headed.
Mm-hmm. So in this group setting is usually online then?
Absolutely. No. There's nothing that is required on a time zone because we're all global. I mean, I have at Ketchum has 2,500 people that need to learn, and they're scattered all around the world. And you probably know how difficult it is to just get a conference call together. It's almost impossible. Somebody's staying up till 1 a.m. It's crazy. So it has to be online, and it has to be easy to use, and that means any screen, iPhone, whatever, any mobile device. So make it easy to use and make it online.
So what is the difference between the courses and some of the digital learning that organizations are trying to do today and MOOCs that's being offered?
Yeah, sure. Okay, that's cool. The MOOCs are great. It's oftentimes quite high quality content from a really well-known subject matter expert. So let's say that you're an engineer and you highly value this particular person at some university who knows your field very well and is talking about some new development in that field. You might be willing to go through watching 10 hours of video, But watching 10 hours of video is pretty tough. And you have to have, all that motivation comes from you. You see what I mean? Where digital learning has to go, there has to be a purpose and a reason in some kind of context to learn this. Typically, it's the organizational purpose or business purpose. Even within a small team or a function, at least there you have a reason to learn, because your colleagues you're going to be using it with your colleagues and they're going to be watching you. Did you learn? You know?
So this is a great way for, employees to learn, to engage with their colleagues. What about self-directed learning?
Right.
And how is that done?
It has its place where you have a specific skill to learn or a specific piece of knowledge, and you just want that knowledge for yourself. Then you can go get it from a library of well-produced content, right? So it has its place. Also, for if the organization is wanting you to learn X and you're kind of interested in Y, it's nice that the organization says, and here's a license and you can look around here in this library of content, but be sure you do this, okay? So, self-directed learning still has its place, but I would say to a person who is interested, how many times have you gone to the New York Public Library to learn? Huh? How many times? Go in that big old library, beautiful as it is, and find a book. I mean, it's difficult.
So what's the best use of self-directed online learning that offers a library of content?
Best use of it is that within your community or organization, you understand that the skills and competencies that you need to have, and you're aware of, from the organization, what they see you as doing well and where you could probably grow and develop, and then they provide you the means to do that. But they don't just say, go here to the New York Public Library and good luck. They say, oh, they have some great content here in this library that we've purchased of online content. They have some great content in that specific skill. So go into this area, look through these 4 classes, pick the one that really most interests you, and do that. And then it helps if I'm also placed in a group of people who are using that same library, and then we can chat somewhere, either online or at a coffee break.
So what other challenges do organizations have around digital learning? Some of the things that you've mentioned, I know a lot of CLOs are still trying to figure out how to properly do it, implement it. What are some of the challenges that they're facing?
There's a fair number of challenges. One, just to start with, budgets are decreasing generally across all businesses, and I think also non-for-profits. The learning and development budget is shrinking. Everybody's trying to manage that expense and do more with less. And that's why digital has such a great promise. But if you have less of a budget, then you need to know that when you invest it on a digital platform, that it's going to really work. And that's one of the challenges, is it's still relatively new. It's still difficult to prove return on investment in learning activities. You can, but it's a kind of an indirect path, you know what I mean? So that's another challenge. So budgets are shrinking, and you need to prove that this investment is going to really work, and the digital field is still evolving. It's hard to prove. Learning in general is hard to prove. I would say a final thing is that the history of e-learning is so terrible. When people hear digital learning, they immediately go, oh gosh, no, please don't do that to me, you know? And so we have to overcome that and show them that actually this technology can be very powerful and good.
What would you say are some of the advantages and disadvantages of digital learning? Yeah.
First of all, the advantages are it's scalable. It works around the world without time zone problems, right? And it has great promise for learning. It really can bring about real learning for adults if done properly. The downside of it is that in the end, you still haven't met that person. And the physical meeting of another person, there's much more there than can ever be conveyed in an online environment. So it helps if you already know these people. That's why I think digital learning must be done in a context amongst people that have a common purpose, maybe know each other a little bit. Then you have that human context, and the digital learning can become meaningful by itself. But if it's that, and you haven't met the people, you're still missing the human being in the presence of another human being. There's a whole lot more there than can be ever put online, thank goodness.
So what does continuous reskilling look like, and how can digital learning help with that?
The current reality of our business environment, and I think just the general environment in the world, is it's moving like this. So I just learned something, guess what? It's out of date. Especially the field that I've been working in, public relations. Okay, our audience we're trying to get on behalf of this client has been using WhatsApp. Well, guess what? Now they just went to whatever. Well, what's that new one? So I might have gotten skilled in the WhatsApp functionality of getting my client's message through to it. That lasts 6 months, maybe a year if you're lucky, and then there's something new. That whole field, I would say our earthly consciousness of how we relate and communicate with each other is changing just rapidly, it's like crazy all the time. And so we have to find a way to navigate through that ocean of information. And technology will help us, but I have a quote for you, okay? This comes from Manuel Castells. Technology, it's neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. So we have to find the way to use this technology to our advantage and not let it so overtake us that we become just kind of a little robot at the end,
So what are some ways that Chief Learning Officers are actually looking at trying to do this, offer continuous reskilling in an information age where things are always changing?
So when we put together the learning program, we need to have it be such that the participants themselves evolve the knowledge that we're putting in place. So for example, at Ketchum, we wanted our people to learn how to use the paid, earned, shared, and owned variety of communication channels in social media. Peso was the term. We could, at that moment in time we built the program, we could give them the state-of-the-art knowledge of paid, earned, shared, and owned, right? But that we know in 6 months it's already changed. So we put in place the framework within which those 2,000 people going through in groups of about 30 each, they shaped the knowledge and said, this doesn't work in China. In China we have to use X. Or this is okay for now, but it's going to be replaced by Y. You see what I mean? You give them what you know, and then they have to evolve that, and you have to pay attention and let their knowledge become the subject matter expertise.
You talked a lot about how today's generation learns through socializing, collaboration. Tell us what the research says about social collaborative learning in the workplace.
Right. The millennials coming along, they're used to getting what they need to know right now on the device in their hand, on their mobile, generally speaking. And then they're used to debating that knowledge and chatting with their friends about it. And I think part of that comes from the fact that the digital revolution has so transformed the world that the older generations who haven't experienced that, the millennial generation, they have the experience that the older people, and that's as old as humanity, but they have the experience the older people don't quite get it. And there's a lot of truth in that right now, because that digital way of relating is very different. It's fast, I want it now, and I'm going to debate it and show me why this is useful. And my friends who have grown up with me have a better understanding of how we make use of this. You see what I mean? So the research is showing that you've got to place your content there.
What would you say is the best approach to digital learning in the workplace, given that you can Google everything today?
Right, it's a great question. Why not just Google everything? The problem is when you Google it, if you've got it, that's a nice piece of information, so what? I mean, how do you use it? The first thing you're going to do is turn to others and say, have you tried this? You know, they're going to go, oh, I tried, it doesn't work, go here. Or yeah, it was great, or I don't know, you know. And so the first thing you do with that information is you talk to others, right? So Google is great, actually. I've used it. I had to cut a tree down, you know, and I went online and found a great how you saw down a tree, you know, that was great. But the first thing I did is talk to other people who sawed down trees, and they said, well, be careful about this, and buy this kind of saw, etc. You see? So we can Google everything, and it's great, but it's not enough. It's just information. You have to contextualize it with others' experience. And then, still, why should you do it? What's the general overarching purpose of why you're learning this? And why are you going to give energy and time to it? And Google can't answer that.
So in what ways can technology-based learning help most, given that information is constantly shifting?
The way it helps the most is it enables a connectedness that you can't have in a face-to-face environment. Because the nature of the knowledge we need these days has to be global in nature. And if it's going to be global, that means that I need to know what my colleague thinks in Russia. Now, I may be sitting in America and thinking, you know, those Russians, they're sneaky. A colleague in Russia may disagree with that, right? So if I have a policy that I'm working on centrally for the company, I need to know what the American views it this way. How does the Russian view it? You know, and it can actually be quite different. Well, technology is a way that enables that, because if I wait till I get all of our people together once a year, it's just too late, it's too slow. So technology is a really great enabler of gathering together this contextual information that then makes meaning out of what we're trying to do. Without technology, it's just too slow, doesn't work.
Have you seen that play out in the workplace?
Yeah, sure. At Ketchum, we did this program called The Race to Make It Real. We were trying to get our people to do a big creative leap from old PR, where I tried to get the New York Times reporter interested in my client's story, and maybe he or she would write about it, right? Leaped all the way over to, actually, it's all about social media and the audiences forming the brand, etc. And we needed to do that in 6 months. Now, in the old days, we'd have done the, you know, bring the senior people together, and they would cascade this, so to speak, to others, and then it would trickle down. No way, absolutely not. So we put a complete online program together that was done in small cohorts of about 30 people each, that we had pre-programmed, but then we harvested what that global group of people told us about how this new strategy should be implemented, you see? And it was very, very successful. They really enjoyed it, and the organization was able to kind of jump to the future.
Tell us about microlearning. What is microlearning, and how does that enhance digital learning experience in organizations?
Microlearning is, I'm going to take this 6-second Vimeo, you know, that 6-second Vine, a small thing, and that's going to be something I carry with me today and figure out how it's going to fit into what I do today. Or I'll just grab this little piece of information off of this particular website, and I'll carry that with me today, and I'll see how it goes. And so it's a little bit like eating snacks, you know. Actually, a good way to lose weight, if you go to people that help you lose weight by eating small amounts continuously rather than big meals. And that's what micro-learning is. You're taking small amounts continuously, and actually that can be satisfying and nurturing over time, to use that metaphor, and can add up to something that's sustaining for you. And you're not trying to start with the whole thing.
So how is that applied in organizations? How do L&D organizations implement this?
It's left up, generally speaking, to the individual to find it. We can provide it as L&D. We can provide libraries, we can provide context, we can provide ways in which they can input that into the system, but it's really more individually led.
Is there a way to motivate employees to use something like these?
Yes, I would say in the whole field of digital learning, the motivation is perhaps at the heart of what's going to make digital learning valuable, whether it's micro-learning, vast libraries, or self-directed learning, or these cohort-based contexts I've been talking about. Why should they, or why should I as a learner give this time for this learning? What's going to motivate me? And to the extent we think it's all up to my motivation, well, you know, the bell curve of human beings from highly motivated to I don't care, right? You can't depend on that. It's a question of, sure, we want the individual's motivation. Why is that learning? How and what way is that going to enable me? And in what way is my learning going to enable the organization? That is actually motivational to people. So, may I give you an example?
Yes.
So an example would be, we did this program. People gave 6 to 8 hours over 4 weeks of online learning in a small group of 30 or so, and they learned a new digital skill. It's great. They really loved it. Now, they were motivated partly because they knew their career path depended on them learning digital skills. They did it partly because they could see the organization as a whole to compete successfully in the world of PR would have to do it, okay? They did it, and I think almost equally, because in each of these cohorts there was a leaderboard, and you were ranked on how much your colleagues liked your ideas and how good were your ideas and how many people responded to your ideas, and that got you points on a leaderboard. At the end of each month, we took the top 3 people in each of the teams. We were doing 10 teams of 30 per month. Took the top 3 on the leaderboard, 30 people. They had 1 hour live conference webinar with the CEO discussing their ideas. They loved it, and that was motivational to everybody taking the learning, that they might end up, because the visibility you got was very high. And you could even be a intern in Munich, and you might be the top 3. See? So those kind of external motivators matter a lot.
Do you think the motivators for the millennials are different than they are for other generations?
Yes, I do. In some ways they're the same. Help me get ahead, make more money, have a good, career. The ways in which they are different is they have a lower expectation of a long-term loyalty to the company. They have an expectation of movement, that they will move around, right? So the motivations need to be, why should I stay with this company when I can go to 4 others in the next, 3 years? And gosh, I've already been here a year, that's pretty long, So the motivations are, there's a reason to stay here. And I would say organizations have to work harder to connect up with that generation's sense of purpose and try to connect it to the organizational purpose. With my generation, it was General Motors, great. What should I do?
How do organizations implement learning, and specifically digital learning, so that it actually results in learning and not just wasted time?
That's a great question. You have to know the end goal in mind, and then you need to design learning that achieves that end goal. You can't just do learning because it's nice to have. You can't just hope the learning achieves it. And I would say you should have a mindset that says it's simply another business investment. And how do you invest that such that that learning achieves the business or organizational outcome you desire? And if learning isn't the best way to do that, don't invest it in learning. Maybe do an acquisition. You see what I mean? I think the learning and development field must get much more business oriented. It's been a little too much of employee benefit, nice to have, keep the people happy. That's old. The new reality is learning and development is so critical to the business success because of this globalized world and the nature of the internet. The learning and development needs to kind of grow up and get at the C-suite table because the organization needs it, but it needs to be now investment oriented and invest in what's going to really achieve business purpose. And so that's where you start, and then the learning can be built for that, and then no other way. The C-suite, either the CEO or the chief marketing officer or the chief financial officer, are more clear that the organization has to iterate faster in its evolution of its products and services, given this reality. And they're going to get that wherever they need to get it, and they'll turn to the learning and development function and say, I want this. If learning and development doesn't deliver that, they'll find another to do it. They'll go outside if they have to. So what's happening is the learning and development function, which has been traditionally under HR as yet another employee benefit, is starting to move out from under HR, and the business leaders are wanting to grab it and say, make this happen. You see what I mean? And some power struggles going on there between HR and other functions. But learning and development has to become a business-focused function. And that's a change from a employee benefit.
You also talk about the role of learning and how learners can move from ignorance to wisdom in their learning.
Yeah.
Talk more about that and the role that technology plays in this.
Great. Yeah, so it's a pretty simple model. It goes like this: ignorance, illusion, fact, knowledge, wisdom. Okay? Now, ignorance is if you don't know what you don't know, you're really ignorant. You're not even aware you don't know. So you have to start really with some sense of, I can probably learn something. Now, illusion is alternative facts, just to use a current term. If you go facts, you can go to Google, it's full of facts. But a lot of those are illusions. They're not necessarily true, right? And so the question is, to move along from ignorance, first you got to know what you don't know. Then you got to sort out illusion from fact. Once you get to fact, how are you going to make any use of it? You still have to, the movement from fact to knowledge is, okay, this is true. And for me to have know-how, I have to understand it. I have to know how to practice it and enact it behaviorally and make it happen in the world. That's a movement shift from fact to knowledge. Even so, I have a new skill. Wisdom is where you use that skill and how you adapt it for different circumstances and when you don't use it, right? So now technology, the great thing about technology and the downside is it's going to give, it is already provided a million zillion facts, of which many are illusion, but there are a lot of good facts there, so first you have to sort that out. Then you need to take them from fact to knowledge. And I think technology is pretty good at that, actually, because it can show you quite a bit. And again, to my point, do this in a small group of peers that have a shared context, right? So that you adapt this skill, this fact, into something that works where you are for the purposes you're trying to achieve, okay? And that's become knowledge already. Now, to make it wisdom, you need to, if you have a global group, then that global group needs to say, okay, we can use that skill here in this way, but not that way. And whatever you do, don't bring that skill here. I could tell you a short story if you wanted to hear something like that. So a short story would be, as a trainer in America, worked for Center for Creative Leadership for quite a long time. Then I've been 16 years here at Ketchum. When you teach a classroom group in America, the first thing you do when you have that half-day workshop, the first person you call in is the youngest person in the room. Everybody relaxes. Oh, thank goodness, everybody's going to have a voice. Even the young guy gets to speak. Okay, beautiful. Now, the first time I went to China many years ago and did a workshop and called on the youngest person, it was very embarrassing for everybody. Because in China, you should call on the most senior person. And if you call on the most senior person first, everybody relaxes. Okay, good, we're going to pay attention. Because culturally, in China, you should pay attention to the senior person. That's what I mean by the same skill, delivering a workshop successfully, changes dramatically based on context, right? Now, technology can help us if we can gather people around globally in relation to that skill and say, it works like this here, that there.
Have you applied this model at Ketchum in your L&D programs?
Yes, we have. I'll answer that question this way. The rest of the world says, oh gosh, North America's not another North American program. Oh, it's all about America. Can't you guys pay attention to us? Took us a while, but we started listening and realizing that the North American point of view is okay. But why don't we listen to what Europe says, how they like to learn, and the ways in which they learn, and the kinds of content they want to learn from, you see? And then in Asia Pacific, same. And so it begins with listening and wondering, how does this culture wish to learn, right? And so we've allowed then the learning function to develop locally, regionally, as it needs to. We can provide some guidance globally, but then we expect it to change locally.
How does the application from knowledge to wisdom actually happen
Right.
in an L&D training setting?
It happens, and here my view is you have to have technology, because the insights that were gained from let's say it's a client service program, how to be the most successful with your clients in bringing on a new product or service to the client. And that's taught differently in the United States and differently in Europe, and it's different in Asia. Now, how do we bring that knowledge together? Traditionally, it's been through people. So we might take our head of new business development, good guy, Peter Fleischer, fly him around the world, and we still do, and he talks to everybody, and he picks it up. Okay, works like this in Asia, like this in Europe, okay? But what we want is the whole organization to understand that, and there you need technology, and that's stories through the internet on here's how the new business methodology is evolving, here's how it works here's a case study of how it works in China, here's a case study in Europe. And because our people are all working with global clients, it's actually quite helpful for them when they develop a new campaign for a client to remind the client that this goes differently here, here, and here.
You also talk about the growth spiral and
Yeah.
growth-based learning.
Yes.
Tell us more about that.
Sure. You know, that we have this notion of a spiral of learning. I'll learn a little bit here and I'll build on that and it'll spiral. The problem there is that you can get caught in this kind of continuous loop, like when you're waiting on the internet for the application to open and it goes still working, you know, that little symbol. There's a certain amount of spiral-like learning that's like that. You feel like you're building on and learning, but you're actually kind of stuck in this bubble. So really growth-based learning starts with the notion that what you learn should change your view of the future. I'll give you an example. This is just a very simple model. You plan to do something, you do it, you reflect on it, and you yield an insight from that reflection that you can use in the future. Now, a lot of what we do is, I plan to do it, I did it, didn't work, I'll plan again, oh, that didn't work either, I'll plan again, maybe that'll work, okay, that's plan, do, plan, do, plan, do. Once in a while we say, oh no, we're going to stop and reflect, how'd this go? So we do plan, do, reflect. We go, that didn't work very well. You still don't have any learning. You have to go to, so what's the insight we got from this reflection that in the future we will hold dear to? We just simply are going to use this. When you do that, your spiral opens up, and there's actually in Mother Nature, there are actual spirals that show that opening up like this, and it's actually a very dramatic increase in span of consciousness. That's what growth learning is, but it's hard work.
And again, how can you fit something like this into digital learning?
Well, that's the promise and the downside of digital. The promise of digital is, if we could take our people through that plan, do, reflect, yield insight, don't get to move forward until you've yielded insight. Digital can help with that because we can bring quite a community of people together and stay till we're sure we got that insight. Or digital can absolutely deaden it by saying, oh, we got an insight, just use this insight. Instead of going through that process, you see what I mean? And there's a lot of digital learning out there that's like that. Already figured out, here's your answer. Go and do.
Yeah. What does that look like? The digital learning solutions that are just like people consider boring, let's say.
It's typically a half-hour video by a subject matter expert, which is good information, but it's not contextualized to you or your organization or your purpose. So, for example, let's say you want to become a more effective leader. Okay? If you go to Amazon.com and in the book section, you search for leadership, you know how many books come up? 270,000 books on leadership, all of which are no doubt excellent. You follow me. And so that's the downside if we think somehow in that already produced learning outcome that there's growth of skill and knowledge and wisdom in that. There can be, but then it's all on me individually in my self-directed learning to take that in and use it, and sometimes that helps, But how much better it is if there's a group of us working together. Would an analogy help?
Sure.
This is the book club analogy. Okay, we're going to have a book club. Get everybody together. Okay, everybody, let's go read a book, whatever. Come back in a month. And we'll read whatever's interesting. We'll come back and we'll discuss our books. So we come back in a month. Everybody does a little thing on the book they read, and that's kind of cool. And done. Or book club 2 is, okay, let's all read this book. Everybody agree this book is of value and interest? Yeah, okay. And let's bring our insights from this book back together. When that book club gets back together, they got quite a bit to share, and it's already still individually contextualized. It adds context to that reading. And that's what I mean by having a group pay attention to a common purpose. It needs to be coordinated like that.
How can organizations offer employees information and learning when they need it?
Right.
That's more direct, kind of like mobile apps do, to check a train schedule
Right.
or check a flight schedule.
That's right. Yeah, so this is one of the problems for L&D groups currently, is that the LMSs are too old. They're not flexible enough. And so learning has to go to an app in which the learner can access the catalog of whatever learning is available from the agency on an app on their phone, and just say, oh, this class is coming up, I want to register, click. I actually it took about 2 years and way too much money to get to a one-click enrollment at Ketchum University for our people, but that was really worth it. Where it used to be you could say, okay, I'm kind of interested in this, okay, can you show me a little more, okay, so when is the class, okay, how do I register? To, register, see what I mean? And so that's where learning development has to be in terms of its functionality. It has to be available on an app instantaneously to people where they can see as much or as little as they want and get it when they want it.
So then what kind of digital expertise is required to integrate all of these elements, these digital elements, into the organization?
It's a great question. You might say, what are the competencies needed by CLOs these days? And what's interesting is first of all, you should have some knowledge about the differing learning habits of the generations coming in. You must communicate in a way that generation wants to learn and absorb, okay? That's one skill you must have, is a knowledge of generations. Another is you must have a knowledge of how, let's call it the platforms within which learning is delivered digitally around the world, how those are evolving. They're evolving at breakneck pace. A lot of old LMSs are old, antiquated, don't work anymore. They don't aggregate and connect knowledge properly. So you have to become pretty knowledgeable about the kinds of platforms within which learning is made accessible instantaneously to the learner when they want it, and they can find it easily. So you're becoming a technical expert, a technology expert, it's better to say. And then a third one is to know how content is evolving. All these libraries, these vast libraries of content, Harvard Management or lynda.com, Skillsoft, all those kinds of degree, those kinds of places, you have to know what do they have and how are they evolving that function, right? And then you should also be aware of the startups, which is what I found at Ketchum. I found this little startup, Nomadic Learning is the name of it. And they were just at the cutting edge of this technology of cohort-based learning, right? So as a CLO, the old CLO, you knew who was the dean at the Harvard Business School, And you made sure that the really good, teacher from the Harvard Business School came in and did your thing. And just feel that and compare that to this, where you're worried about apps, worried about instantaneous, worried about best digital, worried about content. That's the new reality for the learning CLO function.
Tell me more about what that ideal platform would look like. or does look like?
Sure. It has the following attributes in it. It is available anywhere at any time on a phone. It has the whole comprehensive library of what your organization wishes to offer and make available to people. It's a one-click registration and it shows up on your calendar, right? Now that's just a technical necessity that takes a lot of development work, especially in the large, if you think about the large organizations, you know, the General Motors or Chrysler, 300,000 people globally, MetLife, that kind of thing. How much is involved in that? It's not easy, but it's worth it. You need a platform that does that. You need a platform that allows people to work together easily. For example, a couple are Slack, if you know Slack. Slack is like an app that is work-focused, so people can work together easily. They can find threads and conversations, form groups easily. There's a lot of vendors trying to do that. Facebook is trying to do it. They have Facebook at Work now, which is kind of a Slack-like application for Facebook at Work. So whatever platform you have needs to allow those kinds of formative communities that are social and collaborative in nature to easily form. And if you're in a regulated industry, then be protected, you know what I mean. And you need a platform that is up all the time, 24/7, no problem, and that allows other applications to easily link into it and pull back from it. And the final thing you need an HRIS system that is able easily to pull together the information you want from around the employee base and bring that data together. That's a pretty difficult process too.
So then how do you make digital learning so that it's personal and it's authentic, so that it actually leads to people having a positive experience and wanting to learn more?
The first thing to do to help learning be so interesting, people want more, and they personalize it, it has to be highly produced and placed in a methodology in which you get a little bit right away that's very interesting and you can go for more, or if it's not, you don't. You don't force them into a half-hour video. So a minute and a half, you decide if you click here for more. Okay, so first the content has to be produced. Secondly, if you're in an organization setting, have you thought about how that learning connects to the organizational mission or purpose or business outcome, right? If you have, that individual is interested. They're making money from that organization, you're paying them, and they would like to see that their work achieves that goal. So you have to make that connection, and that does engage the person. So really well-curated content, a clear link between my learning and the organizational purpose of which I'm in. And then the other thing is, how about some friends? You know, colleagues, let's call them, within the organizational setting. If you think about anything you're interested in online, if it's interesting, you share it. You send it to your buds, right? Well, not so different at work. Learn something, and in a sharing context in which others are commenting on it, making sense of it, that is how we are all experiencing the world today. So that content must be placed in that cohort, I would call it, where that cohort probably is within the organization, has a common purpose, and can discuss what's going on and share what they think is good and say what they think is terrible, you see? So that's how you make content knowledgeable, and that's what we tried in that program, and it worked. I can tell you why they liked it. The first thing they said, loved it. So why? They said because it was rigorous. That was very counterintuitive for me. I said, tell me more. And what they said was, most e-learning is so boring and superficial, and you know, it doesn't matter whether you learn it or not. In this program that we'd put together in this cohort basis, you couldn't escape. People could tell whether you learned or not. It was very rigorous, and they liked that. You see what I mean? Because you showed what you knew, and they liked that. And then they liked ease of use and meeting other people, and the content was well produced, et cetera, et cetera. But it's interesting if you think about that it's real and meaningful and substantive.
So it seems that social interactive tools are a really important way for employees to engage and learn. What are some ways to encourage that more in the workplace?
It's a great question. There's a variety of ways in which you can encourage the use of social collaborative applications such that they are work-focused. If you're not careful, they can quickly become non-work focused, you know. So, for example, everybody's on Facebook. Now, you can have a organization group on Facebook. That's kind of cool. People might come in, might not. Or you can develop a Facebook at work group and then say to people, how about don't send emails, use this. And that gives them a reason to participate there and to stop sending so many emails, because they know if they post here, it's going to be seen by everybody in the community, for example. That's a way in which you're encouraging the use of social collaborative applications, but it still has relevance to the organizational purpose. There's always a tendency somehow to want to just say, oh, give the people the apps and let them be free as they develop what they need to know. It's just not true. In other words, why do people work together in groups? Because they want to achieve some kind of common purpose. If you're going to do that, you need to have that common purpose at hand when you're building these apps. And then, for sure, build the apps. Give them apps. Either you built it or just have them. There's plenty out there that are, you could do a WhatsApp group, you can do a Facebook, or you can do whatever you want. You can put people on Slack and have them build a Slack group that's doing a project together, for example. So, yes, do that, but do that in a way that's in relation to the organization purpose.
Now, a lot of these platforms are actually cloud-based today.
Yes.
Isn't that right? Do organizations and leaders feel like there's a security threat?
Yes, is the answer. And it's quite difficult for the more regulated industries, insurance, healthcare. It's a real problem. In those industries, they must, both for good reasons, but also by law, protect the information and keep it private, like of patients' information, for example. So it's a very big deal. And IT, I think, which used to be just go buy us some laptops, is becoming right at the center, especially of the regulated industries, because it has to know how to protect through a firewall what the organization needs protected, you know.
What role does artificial intelligence and machine learning fit into the digital learning space today?
Great. A lot. I mean, there's a lot that machines can do that maybe even do better than humans. For example, if your company needs to hire 600 people and you get 50,000 resumes, not enough people to read those. But machines can do a pretty good job of scanning and checking words and etc. So that's a really good use of machine intelligence on the behalf of the agency. And then when you've got the 40,000 resumes down to whatever, 1,200 or I don't know what the number is, then you need a human being, right? So machines can take off some of the stuff that is either not possible for humans or too boring, or they can do quicker and faster and more efficiently. And so there's many applications like that. And then in terms of artificial intelligence, the virtual reality is going to be quite useful. To the extent you think of how business simulations have always been helpful for people to learn in workshops, typically face-to-face workshops, just go through the simulation. There's a lot of online simulations that can mimic that, and then artificial intelligence, the virtual reality, gets to where you can actually walk through this simulation in a very useful way. So it's got a lot of application and helpfulness in the future.
How can virtual reality be used in digital learning in the public relations space?
Sure, good question. Just yesterday at this conference, I was hearing somebody from the aerospace industry talk about how they taught their engineers in India using virtual reality. That made a lot of sense, right? Now, in the public relations space, it's more a question of storytelling. Can you show through a story, can I experience through this virtual reality what my audience member is seeing and hearing? And if I understand that, I'll be able to create a better story for that person. So it's more using it to create insights into audiences or people that see the world through their point of view, then you can communicate more effectively with them.
How is management leadership training evolving to meet the realities of learning today?
I love that question because it has not yet been solved. In other words, if you think about the millennial generation, how they expect to consume and learn about leadership development, still what we're offering is either A, come to this leadership workshop and get some feedback on your personality, learn how to give feedback to others and how to coach others and be inspiring. I mean, you know, the usual. And you've got half day, a day, 3 days, or maybe some here and a few months later. Maybe even get a coach. Okay, that is so costly that only the top, probably 5% of the you can't afford to do that for everybody in the organization. Okay, then the other thing is, well, we'll buy a library of really nicely produced content on how to give effective feedback and every other thing in leadership. And we'll put it out there and we'll ask our people to learn it and to discuss it in their team. And maybe ask a team to go here, take these 5 courses and discuss together, okay? That's pretty boring too because it's, I don't know, it doesn't have enough context. And so where the field needs to evolve to, and I would say it hadn't gotten there yet, needs to evolve to a place where the group of people who need to develop these leadership skills, and I'm thinking of the millennials at the base of the pyramid of the organizations, they need to learn how to manage that, like their first manager job, and they're not managing yet and they need to learn, or they already became managers and they need to learn. They need to be given that in this digital environment through this method I was describing of a small cohort based where all of the knowledge has been produced, but it's in context to the organization. Might start with a 2-minute video of the CEO saying, boy, leadership's so important here at X, and you know, we always think A, B, C, and so glad you're on the journey to become, you know, a leader at wherever, and so good luck, you know, and we're going to be watching and we're going to be seeing, you know, how these behaviors are used. You feel that context? But it's just a 2-minute video, but it matters because it's them. And then that group is discussing within the context of that company about how to do what they need to do. And the technology allows them to converse, even if they're global and it's virtual. They can get a lot in there. We don't have that yet. And it needs to be very well produced in short bites. It's coming. I think this little company that we did the race to make it real with is getting there. They're trying to go there.
Does it require a bigger budget in the L&D function to do some of these things today that are required digitally than it did, let's say, 10, 12 years ago?
It's a good question. So is this like bigger budgets are needed for L&D? And I would answer the following way. L&D budgets are still shrinking everywhere. Now, the way I would answer your question is to say, given whatever budget you've got, what's the best investment to make for learning? Okay? My point of view is, if you can find this learning like I've been talking about here, this little company, Nomadic Learning, it can look like a relatively significant portion of your ever-shrinking budget, but the return on investment can be far better than sending the top 3% of your managers. Because you're going to send it's scalable. You can send 10,000 people. Now, that can still look like a chunk of change, but when you do it on a per-person look, it's in 1/100th of the cost of sending the executives to a 5-day program. So it's a great question you have. Let's say digital, well done, well-produced digital that works, etc., is not cheap, but it can be a really good investment of your funds. I want to say that, and then part B, answer to your question is, because as organizations, leaders are becoming more aware of the fact that their product or service has to change ever more rapidly than it did in the past, and they need a learning organization present to be understanding how that service or product has to move. Business leaders are going to fund that. You're going to get more funding if you can show how learning and development is going to enable that faster cycling. I was saying this at the conference yesterday. Okay, good news, learning and development. You know, you're we're growing up. We're coming at the C-suite table because the organizations need us because the world's changing too fast and we have to help the organization. That's the good news. Bad news is better show how that investment is going to achieve that, or they'll go find somebody else.
So how is managing a virtual team different than managing a face-to-face team?
If it was face-to-face, you could kind of tell if somebody was dragging into work one day and something's bothering them, or you could tell when they kind of lost enthusiasm, or if they have a lot of enthusiasm. You could see that. Now, that gets a little more difficult in the virtual environment, you know, especially if it's just email. It's hard to tell what's going on. Now, maybe you can arrange some video-based conferencing, and you actually can get a pretty good sense of what's going on with video-based conferencing with the person. But the method of knowing how they're doing and staying in touch is vastly different. And I want to tell a story first and then make a point about it, okay? I think the best way to know whether a person is an effective manager is to observe their team working for that person, okay? That's how you can tell if the manager is effective or not. Now, I love coffee. I'm a big coffee drinker, and I've probably been in every Starbucks in New York City at least twice. I love it. I can walk into any Starbucks, and in 2 minutes I can tell you whether the manager is good. It only takes 2 minutes. You walk in, and you see somebody there like, next. Or you walk in, they go, hey, yeah, next. What would you like? You can tell, I mean, and you can see them talking to each other. Oh, what were you doing last night? Or they're like ignoring each other. That's a manager. The manager has the effect not only of all the, let's say, the business technology that has to be there to make, in this case, Starbucks happen. The manager is showing personal interest in people, enabling the group to have a sense of purpose with what they're doing, and showing them how their work is achieving the goals, right? And how each individual job is in relation to that. That's what digital learning has to become. It has to become that way of enabling a team to know what's going on. Now, how do you do that in a virtual environment, right? You do that through this online learning. It can't be webinars, because if you're global, the time zones are crazy, right? So it has to be in this context of, this is what we're working on this month, team. We're working on be more effective in X, okay? And as part of that, we're going to all take this inventory on our skill level here, and we're going to discuss that. And so take the inventory, post your response to it, tell me how you think the team should enact more effectively. That's all there. And the team is talking back and forth, and the manager's involved in it too. That is enabling that group, like the Starbucks group, to move forward together with each other, with the manager interacting and seeing what's going on. And if that's well built, you know, you see it.
Now, a lot of our work, a lot of digital learning is now taking place, like you said, online. What's the right balance between online versus face-to-face meetings?
I would say that to the extent you can afford the face-to-face, that's just better. There's just more that can happen in a face-to-face meeting if it's possible, if your team is available face-to-face, and if you can afford it, if there's travel costs. That's just always better. But the reality is that for much of the world, that's not affordable or even not possible to get the team together. So the right balance is as much face-to-face as is affordable and possible. And in between that, find digital connectedness that is real and meaningful. I think all of us have that experience on Facebook. Is I stay in touch with people I would never say, I don't see them for 2-3 years, but they're important people for me in the personal networking. I'm really grateful to have that chance, right? So that's all I'm saying is that is same in the workplace. You stay in touch with people that you need to be in touch with, that you have a meaningful relationship with and kind of a common context what you're trying to do. Enable that and expect that to hold water, you know, it's strong enough. And look to it. And don't think that they're going to do this in kind of single I don't know, just go to something and learn by themselves. They need to be part of a community.
Tell us how organizational structures are evolving from formal hierarchies to more networked groups.
The old idea, I'll work there 30 years and I'll go up to the C-suite, is gone. It just doesn't exist anymore. And so the question for these people is, where will I go and how will I get there and what should I do, right? And what is becoming more clear is that it's my ability to find a social group within my workplace within which I can be effective and we can be effective together, okay? There's actually a pretty long stream of research out on this. Rob Cross, social network analysis or organizational network analysis. It's almost 15 years of research now showing that people, when you look at how is work actually accomplished in organizations, it's never the hierarchy, it's never the boxes and the functions. It's always a group of people that work together across those and just make stuff happen. And within those groups, there's some that are connectors and some that are drivers, et cetera, right? So it's been already proven, I would say, that work is most effectively accomplished in social groupings that don't look at all like those boxes on the org chart, okay? So if you overlay that with this millennial generation coming on and saying, why should I do what you tell me to do, boss? Because, you know, Google says this, you follow me, and I think that's legit, right? There's more of an expectation of we're going to evolve this together. You're not just going to tell me what to do and I'm going to be a robot and do it, okay? So the generation coming in, the fact that work is more effectively accomplished in that way, and the fact that for a lot of organizations, there's simply not enough jobs opening up at the C-suite level, right? That for the motivation of the people to find their careers, it's better for them to be moving laterally through functions, right? And building a lot of, and they like this actually, they're kind of open to this, they prefer it rather than being in one area. All of that adds up to the fact that organizations need to allow for this living flexibility of social groupings to achieve the purposes of the organization, while there's always going to be the hierarchy. It's always going to be some that rise to the top and get to say. That's never going away. But to make that the model that everybody follows is gone.
Okay, Robert, well, this was great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Always happy to be a part of Sarter TV.
Thank you. And we'll see you next time on Sarter TV.